imprisonment, arrest. I'd seen Chelsea Manning go through a similar experience.
After 3 years of solitary confinement without trial, the US military's most famous whistleblower, Private First Class Bradley Manning, finally...
Until Snowden, Chelsea Manning's leak of American government documents had been the biggest loss of secrets in American history. WikiLeaks had published the documents, but had to stand by and watch as Manning was caught and held in conditions characterized by the UN as cruel, inhuman, and degrading.
The US tried very hard to make Chelsea Manning a general deterrent in its incredibly abusive treatment of him, psychological torture, and simply for communicating to the media.
I knew about Chelsea Manning, going into it. There was never any question about how that case was going to be settled.
And you were willing to put yourself in the same position?
That's tough to vocalize.
11:25, code 6, 105 North Avenue, 52.
3 days after Snowden went underground, Sarah Harrison landed in Hong Kong. She took charge of what was to become Operation Asylum.
That there was a person by the name of Edward Snowden who had checked in and out, but it's still not clear whether...
What was particularly extraordinary, I think, was while all of these news organizations around the world, all of these publishers were trying to get a piece of the story, there was only one publisher that actually said, we want to help the source. We want to make sure he's okay. We want to make sure that no matter what happens, he has somebody on his side, and that was WikiLeaks.
If there was one thing I could change, it would have been whether we could have done more for Snowden. I did have a discussion with the editor, Alan Rusbridger, and the US editor, Jeanine Gibson, about what we could do for Snowden, whether we should be paying his hotel bills and whether we should be getting him legal advice. I wish we'd thought it through, and maybe if we had more time, we could have come up with something.
It was the US government versus WikiLeaks, and not just in the grand jury court, but right there on the ground in Hong Kong.
Protect Snowden! Snowden blew the whistle on American efforts to spy on innocent citizens. Today, we all blow the whistle.
Protect Snowden!
Protect Snowden! Disavow privacy of internet!
The US government has filed criminal charges against Edward Snowden.
I think it was probably on my birthday when the present I got from the government was that they unsealed an indictment against me.
Edward Snowden has been charged with espionage, theft and conversion of government property.
And what was extraordinary about the indictment was the fact that they included espionage charges. Now, they knew that I wasn't working for any foreign government. That was clear from the beginning. They knew that I was working with journalists, and that the recipient of the information was the public at large.
Washington now wants help from Hong Kong officials because Snowden's been hiding in the Chinese territory since unleashing the revelations about the National Security Agency.
The charge of espionage increased the pressure on the Hong Kong authorities to act and made Snowden's position even more dangerous. It meant that if Snowden was caught, he could face the death penalty back home in the US. Snowden took the risk of leaving his hideout and met his lawyer, who warned him. Sooner or later, Hong Kong would hand him over to the US, where he could expect the same treatment as Private Manning.
In terms of Private Manning's situation, clearly he had been subjected to cruel and inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment. As such, this raised grave concerns about what would happen to Mr. Snowden if he was returned to the United States.
Snowden could not be sure if the Hong Kong authorities would do as the US was demanding and arrest him right away. Hong Kong citizens were on the streets calling him a hero, but the Hong Kong authorities were in an unpredictable situation. Snowden knew there was always the possibility the central government in Beijing would intervene and sacrifice him in a deal with the U.S.
The things that were told to us was that the feeling within the government was that they just wanted it, the Hong Kong government was that they just wanted it gone. He was a hot potato, they just didn't want to have to deal with it. They were either going to upset the people of Hong Kong or they were going to upset Beijing, and it was just too problematic.
The Hong Kong government decided to play for time. Rather than arrest Snowden, they decided to wait for the proper paperwork to arrive. But Snowden was still in danger.
With the nature of the disclosures he made, there was a real and immediate risk that he could be arrested in Hong Kong.
One of the reasons Snowden was so vulnerable was that a White House task force was working the phones and putting pressure on decision makers in Hong Kong.
Since we learned that Mr. Snowden was in Hong Kong, U.S. authorities have been in continual contact with their Hong Kong counterparts at the working and senior levels.
The U.S. was certain if the Hong Kong government decided to arrest Snowden, they would not have problems locating him.
Look, the Chinese have a wonderful intelligence service. I would lose all respect for my Chinese colleagues if they did not have very good knowledge as to what was going on.
Although our analysis was that Ed would face serious consequences and should immediately leave Hong Kong, he was reluctant to do that until it seemed like there was no other choice, because he wanted to explore different options and so on, and this was driving us mad.
WikiLeaks had been working out various options of where he would be safe, where he could go, different people's opinions around the world. But I mean, it was his decision, it's his life.
The border is open, we've got to go. Now's a chance, the border is open, could close, at any time.
Then something happened that narrowed the options for Snowden. The request for his extradition arrived from the United States on a Friday night. Would the Hong Kong Justice Ministry wait until Monday to issue a warrant? Who could know?
They would make a decision and then they would act upon that decision. We needed to move. The clock was ticking, very definitely then.
Mr. Snowden was in a difficult position where he could be arrested at any time.
What Ed was concerned about is knowing the exact status of the border. So he agreed that he should leave, but as soon as he went to passport control, maybe he would be arrested. So he was very reluctant to actually leave because that would cut short his last hours of freedom.
Attorney General Eric Holder placed a phone call stressing the importance of the matter and urging Hong Kong to honor our request for Snowden's arrest.
It was the end. He couldn't wait to continue to assess the situation. He had to make a decision.
That was the moment where it all came together or it didn't. Either our plan worked, our negotiations had worked, and we would get on that flight, or it wouldn't.
We, over the weekend, the United States has been in touch via diplomatic and law enforcement channels with a number of countries which Mr. Snowden might transit or that could serve as final destinations.
This was the largest intelligence manhunt the world has ever seen, so the US was throwing everything, all its resources at this thing. So we needed some way of splitting those resources, because we didn't want them all focused on his flight out. Well, he bought a ticket to India as cover. It was booked using his credit card for 2 days after the actual asylum flight.
In all, WikiLeaks bought more than a dozen tickets in Snowden's name, on flights leaving Hong Kong. They hoped the U.S. wouldn't figure out which flight he and Harrison were aiming for.
I was worried about missing the flight. We were running late, basically, due to the fact that I had been printing all of our airline tickets, and there was an issue with the printer and just sort of these stupid things.
We're advising these governments that Mr. Snowden is wanted on serious felony charges, and as such, he should not be allowed to proceed in any further international travel, other than as necessary.
I spoke to Edward the day before, and I told him that the highest risk is in the airport.
He was getting very nervous, and his lawyer kept calling. I think he worried too that the whole thing would collapse.
I don't think the US would assassinate him in the airport. I don't think that would happen. But that they might kind of make a fuss and lean on airport authorities to hold him and detain him. And then the State Department could bring all its assets to bear.
There have been repeated engagements by the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Consulate General in Hong Kong. There have been repeated engagements by the FBI with their law enforcement counterpart.
You could also be racing to getting captured, right? I mean, you also...
Yeah, running towards them. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm quite sure that that airport was being watched, so.
Ultimately, as I walked up to the checkpoint counter, the only thing I was thinking is that I should remember to smile.
The guy took our passports, which is obviously the normal thing to do. So mine was sort of fine, and then Snowden's one sort of took a while, and again, reaching for the phone, and a little bit confused, and the computer made a funny sound, and so yeah, so again, I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but I was getting very nervous. His lawyer did sort of start stepping forward to sort of see what was going on.
On June 17th, Hong Kong authorities acknowledged receipt of our request. Despite repeated inquiries, Hong Kong authorities did not respond with any requests for additional documents or information, stating only that the matter was under review and refusing to elaborate.
What was under review was that there was a mistake in the American paperwork. In the rush to prevent him from leaving Hong Kong, the State Department got Edward Snowden's middle name wrong. It is not Edward James Snowden, it is Edward Joseph Snowden.
Our people are meticulous in processing legal documents. They had to double-check the spelling, make sure that they are catching the right person, sought by the U.S. authorities. I don't think our authorities deliberately held up the arrest, but we need to take maybe a few days. But a few days was not good enough for the U.S., you know. And apparently Snowden made use of the few days available to work out his escape.
As it happened, we were rushing our paperwork forward as Snowden's trying to leave Hong Kong to fly on to Russia. We made it easier for the Chinese and the people in Hong Kong to make the decision they made because of the delay.
Because, you know, we've now done everything. You know, you've checked in, you've got through security, you've done the bag check, the passport check, you know, you've boarded onto the plane, and then I was like, you're still not okay.
I knew the schedule of the flight was meant to leave, and I was just watching the Hong Kong airport register to see, has the flight left, has the flight left, has the flight left? And it was late. It was 20 minutes late, so I was quite concerned.
Well, then the other thing that made me very nervous was when we were waiting to take off. We came from the gate, and then we go up a bit, and then we just stop, and we're just waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting.
And straight to our breaking news for you this hour. Chinese sources have alleged that NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden is en route to Moscow from Hong Kong. If so, the whistleblower would have departed hours after Washington threatened the Chinese city-state with repercussions if it didn't arrest him.
Hong Kong authorities requested additional information concerning the U.S. charges and evidence. The U.S. had been in communication with Hong Kong, and we were in the process of responding when we learned that Hong Kong had allowed the fugitive to leave.
What is clear is that at the time he left, the State Department did not cancel his passport. Maybe they should have canceled his passports. They canceled his passport after his departure. So when he left Hong Kong, he was holding a valid U.S. passport.
It is very clear to me that the Hong Kong authorities knew the United States wanted to extradite Snowden from Hong Kong to the United States when Snowden is trying to leave the country. And on some made-up pretext, misspelling of his middle name or something in the documents that we gave to the Hong Kong police, they allowed him to leave and to fly on to Russia.
Is the administration embarrassed now that you can't track him down, that he's this cat and mouse game that's going on for all the world to see?
I think I've been very clear about the actions we've taken. We have known where he is and believe we know where he is now, and there are ongoing conversations about that.
We both sort of just sat there, like we really didn't say much until that moment where we were out of the airspace, and there was a visible, and then that's when we first sort of had any real conversation.
And what did he ask? What did he ask you, or what?
Pretty much his first question was, "Why did you do this? Why did you risk everything just to help me?" I was sort of saying, yeah, but you were wanting help or something. And he said, yeah, I was wanting help and advice. I didn't think that WikiLeaks would send a ninja in to get me out, which was funny enough. But then about 2 minutes later, a fly buzzes past. And I've never done it before in my life, and I'll probably never do it again. But I just went, oh, that's annoying, and literally plucked it out of the air. And he was like, you really are a ninja.
Sarah's probably the most incredibly brave woman I know. She's somebody who is there through the hardest times, in a period of incredible risk. And she put her life on the line for somebody who is a complete stranger to her.
There's a lot of information floating around here. Organize it all for us. Tell us what's exactly going on.
We're led to believe that Edward Snowden has safely left Hong Kong and is currently in the sky somewhere over the Russian city of Omsk in an A330. He's due to arrive here, we are led to believe, at Sheremetyevo Airport later on Sunday. That's all rumour and hearsay at the moment, but it's thought that his final destination will not be Moscow.
At that moment, there was a race for the interpretation of what had happened. So had he left as a fugitive, busted through the Hong Kong airport, or whatever, so you had a fugitive on an aeroplane, that was one possible spin that we would see from the media machine. And it was very important to counter that spin, because his whole flight path would have been closed down, because countries and airlines would go, oh, we can't accept this fugitive on our flight. So we put out, as soon as he was in safe airspace, that no, he had left Hong Kong, that he had left Hong Kong legally, that he was accompanied by legal advisors, so this flight path wouldn't be closed down.
Moscow Sheremetyevo Airport Terminal.